When I think about my childhood, I don't remember birthdays or family vacations. I remember comparisons. Almost every day, my parents had someone they wanted me to become. Look at your cousin. He's always at the top of his class. Why can't you be more like the neighbor's son? There are children your age who never make mistakes. No matter what I achieved, there was always someone better. If I got a 95 on a test, they ask, what happened to the other 5 points? If I cleaned my room, they noticed the tiny corner I had missed. I remember one evening especially. I was maybe 8 years old. I had brought home a report card and I ran to show it to my mother before I even took my shoes off. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she set it down on the kitchen table next to the mail and said, "Your cousin got all A's." I stood there, still holding my backpack, waiting for something that never came. That night, I didn't cry. I just learned. I learned that good wasn't the same as good enough. If I broke a glass, if I forgot something, if I answered back, I was punished. Sometimes with shouting, sometimes with silence, sometimes with consequences that made me terrified of making another mistake. Slowly, I stopped seeing mistakes as something I could learn from. They became proof that something was wrong with me. Children aren't born believing their failures. They learn it when mistakes are treated as evidence of who they are instead of opportunities to grow. Over time, shame replaces curiosity and fear replaces confidence. When I was 10 years old, something changed. My parents didn't need to criticize me anymore. I had learned to do it myself. Every time I made even a small mistake, a voice inside my head whispered, "You're so stupid. You always ruin everything. You're never good enough." At that time, I thought that voice was mine. Years later, I realized it wasn't. It was simply the voice I had heard so often that it became part of me. The saddest part is that many of us carry that voice into adulthood without realizing where it came from. We think we're simply being realistic, when in fact, we're repeating words that were spoken to us years ago. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it internalized criticism. The voice from outside doesn't disappear. It just moves in. As I grew older, I became the kind of person everyone admired. I worked hard, I achieved good grades, I built a successful career. People described me as disciplined, responsible, and reliable. What they didn't know was that I lived in constant fear. If my boss asked to speak with me, I immediately assumed I had done something wrong. If a friend replied to my message hours later, I thought they no longer liked me. If someone criticized one small part of my work, I forgot every compliment I had ever received. My mind could only hear one message: you failed. Relationships were even harder. I tried to become whoever people wanted me to be. I rarely said no. I apologized even when I wasn't wrong. I hid my opinions to avoid conflict. I believed that if people saw the real me, they would leave. So I became an expert at earning approval instead of experiencing myself. I learned to perform rather than to belong. Ironically, I often ended relationships first, not because I wanted to, but because being abandoned felt more painful than walking away. If I left first, at least I could pretend it was my choice. For years, I believed I had an anxiety problem, or maybe I was just a perfectionist. Then one day, after another panic attack, a close friend said, "Have you ever thought about talking to a psychologist?" Honestly, I didn't think therapy could change anything. How could talking about the past fix the way I felt today? Still, I made an appointment. During my first session, the psychologist asked me a question that completely changed my life. When you make a mistake, what's the very first thing you say to yourself? Without thinking, I answered, "I'm not good enough." She stayed quiet for a moment. Then she smiled gently and said, "That isn't your voice. It's the voice you learn to believe." I had never thought about it that way. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't born believing I was inadequate. Someone had taught me that, not intentionally, but repeatedly. Over the next several months, I slowly began to understand my childhood. The endless comparisons, the constant criticism, the punishments, the impossible standards. My psychologist said something I'll never forget. When children are constantly compared to others, they don't learn to improve. They learn that who they are is never enough. That sentence explained my entire life. I had spent decades chasing perfection, not because I loved excellence, but because I believed love had to be earned. There is an important difference between striving for excellence and believing your worth depends on it. One inspires growth, the other creates exhaustion. Later, I asked her something that had been sitting on my chest for years. Why would my parents do this to me? She didn't defend them, but she offered me something I hadn't considered. Most people parent the way they were parented, unless someone teaches them another way. It didn't excuse what happened, but it helped me see it differently. Not a villain, a cycle. One that I could finally be the one to break. Now, the process of healing. Healing didn't happen overnight. There was no magical breakthrough. It happened one small moment at a time, through a few specific practices. The first was catching the voice. Every time that old sentence appeared, "You're not good enough," I learned to pause and ask one question. Is this a fact? Or is this just the old voice again? Most of the time, it was just the voice. Naming it took away some of its power. And the second part of healing was speaking to myself the way I would speak to someone I loved. My psychologist asked me once, if your best friend made the same mistake, what would you say to them? I answered instantly, without thinking. I tell them it's okay, that everyone messes up sometimes. She looked at me and said, "Then say that to yourself." It felt strange at first, almost embarrassing, but I practiced it anyway, out loud sometimes when no one was listening. And the third step was going back for that little boy. I started writing to him, short letters, some days just a sentence, telling him what he needed to hear back then. That he wasn't in trouble, that he didn't have to fix anything to be allowed to rest. Writing to him made him feel less like a memory and more like someone I was finally taking care of. And the fourth step was practicing saying no. Small at first. Declining a plan I didn't want to attend. Saying I don't agree in a meeting. Nothing happened. No one left. The world didn't end. Each time, the fear got a little quieter. And I got a little more certain that I was allowed to take up space. Sometimes I still picture that little boy standing in the corner of his room, holding back tears, trying so hard to become someone worthy of love. If I could sit beside him today, I wouldn't tell him to study harder, or behave better, or become more successful. I'd simply tell him what he should have heard all those years ago. You don't have to earn your worth. You don't have to become someone else to deserve love. You're enough, not because you're perfect, not because you've achieved something, but simply because you're you. And perhaps that's what every wounded child has been waiting to hear. And a message to parents. If you're a parent listening to this, I want to ask you something. The next time you're tempted to say, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Or, "Look how well your cousin is doing," pause for just a moment. Comparison rarely inspires children to become their best. More often, it teaches them to doubt themselves, hide their mistakes, fear failure, and believe that love must be earned through achievement. Encourage your children to grow, but compare them only to who they were yesterday, not to someone else. Celebrate effort, kindness, courage, honesty, and persistence just as much as grades or trophies. Every child has a different personality, different character, different strengths, and a different pace of development. The greatest gift you can give your child isn't the pressure to be better than everyone else. It's the safety of knowing you're loved even when you fail. Because children who grew up feeling accepted don't stop trying. They simply stop being afraid. And the final message. Maybe you saw yourself in the story, or maybe you saw your child. This video isn't therapy. It's an invitation to see your past with new eyes and ask yourself whether the beliefs you've carried for years are really yours. If this story resonated with you, consider talking to a qualified psychologist. Healing childhood wounds isn't a sign of weakness. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself and the people you love. And if you're a parent, remember this. The words you repeat today may become your child's inner voice tomorrow. Choose them with love. Because when we heal ourselves and raise emotionally healthy children, we don't just change one life, we help create a better world.